talk about Jack Stilborn's new book, The Tyranny of Good Intentions. This is a humorous political satire that is exploring small-time politics within a condo board. A very fun book. Now, before I invite Jack in, I am going to read you the back cover and give you a little sense of what this book is about. Political science lecturer Andrew Walmer thought he could help out by serving on his condominium board. Instead, he finds himself trapped in an endless saga of petty disputes, bizarre rules, and increasingly desperate attempts to escape, all while trying to repair his relationship with his estranged wife, Francine, a passionate law professor fighting for social justice, and save his career following an offensive classroom joke that could end his teaching days. When the board's iron-fisted president launches a crusade against potted plants, Andrew sees his chance to finally break free. But in the dysfunctional world of condo politics, where every decision is made in service of the community, nothing is ever simple. As new crises emerge and board members start dropping like flies, Andrew discovers that getting off a condo board may be even harder than earning forgiveness from Francine, and that his deeper question haunts him still. If people can't make small organizations work, what hope is there for the big ones? Warm and witty, The Tyranny of Good Intentions captures central challenges of politics. It involves people, and the people need to agree about decisions. It's a story about second chances, the complexities of democracy at its most grassroots level, and finding hope in life's unexpected detours, even if that detour leads straight to the president's chair. And if you can see that small print on the cover, democracy's smallest battleground. And is it ever? I'm excited to talk to Jack and explore his journey to writing this story, to getting it published, to having it out in the world. And he's here, so I'm going to welcome him in. And we're going to chat all things The Tyranny of Good Intentions.
Hi, Alana.
Hi, Jack. How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good. You're right on time.
Indeed. I like to be.
That's excellent. Excellent. It's good to see you.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm glad to hear that even though it's very November-ish, you're still good.
Yeah, well, today we don't have any snow outside. We've had like some days of a lot of snow, and then other days we're waking up to green grass. So
Uh,
we're caught in that weird spot between fall and winter. It's not quite sure what it's doing, but the sun's shining today.
oh, that's good.
And I can see sun out your window, so it's nice where
Yeah,
you
it's,
are too.
that's not bad.
Good. Okay, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about you and your relationship with storytelling, with writing, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Well, you've asked me to give quite a speech there, but I'll try to keep it a bit short. But basically, I have I think I've sort of enjoyed storytelling in some way or other virtually since I was a small child. And by the time I got into public school, I was sort of the designated person whose story would be read. And in high school, I wrote a story called The Return of God or something like that, where God comes back to what he thought would be the perfect planet to see how things are going he comes from the rest of the universe and is somewhat disappointed and gives careful scrutiny, especially to the Saskatchewan high school system, and was very critical about it. So I had a lot of fun with that. So I mean, I've always done things like this. Not, I know that was a written one, but then I began to dabble at writing at a later point, and started several novels that even to me became obvious my big gift to literature would be making sure these went into the garbage because they weren't really very good and they were they were very imitative, I have to say. But I think, that's not a bad way to start out. That's how you find your voice, right? And to some extent by contrast with others that you're familiar with. So anyway, I did that, and I liked doing it. And I did it at one point. This was when I was studying in Europe. I did it in Paris in the summertime, sitting in outdoor cafes, and I felt very much like a writer, but unfortunately, what I produced was still not very good. Anyway, as I say, I've kind of always done this, and more recently, I'm getting a bit more serious about it, and I'm finding what I really like to do, and it's actually probably typical of my style of thinking as well as writing, is I like to find an unusual perspective from which to look at things. Because frequently, if you're the person up in the tree, you're going to see something different in the picnic than you would if you were sitting down there on the blanket, right? So I strive to do that. And then how this novel kind of came out of that was my long term career was working for Parliament as a research person, basically. And I was also serving on volunteer condo boards periodically, as well as other kind of volunteer boards of directors. And at a certain point, I mean, I don't know if I said I worked for the House for Parliament for about 25 years, so that's quite a long time for eventually a light to come on. And the light that came on in this case was the condo boards really seemed very similar to what I was seeing in national politics. And the delightful thing about them is they distill everything down to essences. Instead of having, a vast legislature, you have five people sitting around a table. And so you see some of those basic dynamics, I think, more clearly. So that's kind of where the inspiration for the novel came from. And kind of I went from there.
So you served on condo boards yourself?
I have been on several, yes, and actually, I have to say I was on one where I live now, which is a condominium, and one of the downsides is I've got people creeping up to me now and saying, "Martha told me I'm in your novel," and so I have to say, "Oh no, no, definitely not," So yeah,
That
I've been.
dangerous ground.
I've been, I've been in a couple of condo boards as well as others, and I think the condo boards, in a way, are somewhat unique compared with the other ones I've been on. Because the other ones, like say a social services agency board, they're kind of mission driven, and all the people who are there have a basic, very similar commitment to what they're doing. But in on a condo board, it's very much who kind of fetches up at the table, and in both of the ones that I was on, it was a continuous struggle to get people to come to the table, to try to get them into this. So you often have people who are just on very different pages. So it's an unusual environment in that way. And you also don't have people that have a lot of, say, political experience and smoothness under their belt. So when they find themselves disagreeing, they sometimes struggle to deal with that. But for me, I mean, that's all. It's fascinating to watch for one thing, and it's even more fascinating now that I'm not on the board too.
Yeah, to watch from the outside. So
Yeah.
you certainly explore those angles within your novel. There's a lot of weird, maybe weird's the wrong word, but interesting characters who are on this condo board, and there is an ongoing struggle of keeping it manned, keeping quorum, basically, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
which is obviously coming from your own experience. And often the things that they're dealing with seem so petty in the grand scheme of things, but in the moment, it's such a hot topic, like issues with squirrels or potted plants is one of
Yes.
my favorite wars, that one of the battles that happens. Um, did you see things like that in real life? Those kind of silly arguments that don't seem to have high stakes, but in the moment are really intense and people are very passionate. Is that true to life?
Yes, I have to say that is, and I hope not too many of my neighbors will be listening to this podcast. But anyway, and actually, it's one of the things that I noticed as a parallel between condo board life and larger politics. Because I've been in situations in larger politics where, for example, a committee, as things came down to the wire on a constitutional report back in the day when, the Constitution and negotiations were hot, things like what are we going to do about the Senate were still kind of floating, not quite resolved. And the whole table gets into a debate about the color of the covers of the report. And I'm sitting there saying, well, what? I mean, I've seen things like that. And elsewhere in the parliamentary world, it's often quite small concrete things that many MPs can relate to. And so when something comes along like $35 got spent on pencils in this office or something, they can kind of seize on that. And meanwhile, an estimate for, $5 million for something, oh, yeah, sort of let that go. So it's actually characteristic, I think, of politics in a way, although certainly, after they get more seasoned and experienced, they'll get more discriminating. But especially for people who are new, those are the things they can relate to. And on the one hand, you sort of tear your hair out, but on the other hand, in my mind anyway, I mean, that's part of what Parliament is about. It's about people coming and remembering exactly the concerns they had before they got elected, and making sure those kind of get voiced. So, it's a mixed blessing for sure. But certainly, if you're trying to get a report done and people get preoccupied with the cover or something, that can be a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We can find
Yeah.
the same
So,
kind of tension in publishing too, right? That we've spent this
yes.
time on the story and
Yeah.
we're ready to move on, but then there potentially can be a great difference of opinion in cover design or like how are we
Oh.
presenting this into the world. So it's happening everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my goodness me, I'm astonished that it would be happening in publishing. Goodness
Oh,
me.
yeah.
Sort of. Anyway,
Imagine.
just to pick up the other half of your question, sort of about the condo board. Did I see it? Yeah, absolutely. It was there too. And again, coming from sort of this parliamentary environment and so on, my initial reaction, I have to confess, was somewhat almost contemptuous. How could these people get wound up in this stuff? But then the more I thought about it, I realized in a way nothing is petty to the person who feels strongly about it. And that was educational for me because it helped me to sort of understand, I think, why people do what they do. Your
Right.
examples are very well chosen, and for sure. I mean, and I might have exaggerated just a little bit. 'Cause for a while, I was going to some sort of a conference deal where people from other condo boards would converge, and I'd get talking to them, and they'd bend me with my ears with stories that I couldn't believe, about huge fights breaking out at a community barbecue or anything. I mean, anything you could imagine. So it's a strange world, and I do still live in a condo, so I guess I would say it's survivable.
Right, right. And people say, write what you know. So you've set a good example of that here. So obviously your experience in politics and in your condo informed your writing of this story, but your main character, Andrew, I know you've been asked this before, but how much of you is reflected in who he is as a character?
Yes. Well, I have been asked this before. I think it might have been at the book launch party. So I'm now terrified to make sure that my answer is going to be consistent with what I said
Oh
then.
no.
But what I would plea is, we're all in the business of fiction. So I mean, goodness me, why do we have to be consistent? But anyway, I guess my answer is your personality is one of the resources that you draw on, whether you want to or not. I think when you write anything, so in that sense, there is probably some level of experience kind of leaking into this. I felt that I made Andrew quite different from me in a number of ways. One of which is he's much younger. He's about 38, much kind of earlier in the rest of his life too, like with his situation with his marriage and his career and so forth. So that's one quite big difference. Also, I saw him as quite an athletic fellow who played squash or tennis, I guess it was, in his spare time quite seriously, and he takes his son out for baseball practice and practices and trains him with pitching especially, and a series of things like that. And certainly at that age, I wouldn't have qualified myself as an athlete, especially there are things I like to do now, but I do them at appallingly slow speeds for the most part. So when I'm doing my cycling, I've got people zipping past me, continuously. So I mean, I guess what I'm saying is there are lots of differences like that. Perhaps in some of his attitudes, and especially his his interest in the way the organization and the condo board works and what he brings to that from the fact that he's a political science lecturer. There's probably echoes of me in there because that's sort of my background too. And one of the things I was interested in the whole condo board thing was just how well does this work as a way of looking after buildings, for one thing. It's something to think about. I guess I've given you a kind of waffly answer there.
No, I think that that's great. And have you had readers try to identify pieces of you within him? Has any of that come back to you?
Not really. So the question when it came up at the launch took me by surprise in a way. I guess it took me by surprise partly because when I'm thinking about these books, I'm tending to think in a slightly more abstract way about, the condo board and the dynamics and patterns and what can I think of to have happen that would illustrate blah, blah, blah. I'm sort of at that level. So I tend to, I think, not relate to the personalities in the book as much as some other readers would.
Do you have a favorite moment within the story? Was there a scene that was particularly fun to write, or when you read it back, you were particularly proud? Do you have a favorite
Yeah.
moment?
I think I have a number of them. Certainly, since my objective was, I strongly think that given everything that's happening with writing these days, writing has to be really enjoyable when people do it. Otherwise, they're going to find a million other things to do, right? So my strategy in part was I wanted the book to be really funny, or at least have some funny moments in it. And so I was quite happy when these moments came along and seemed to take shape. And I'd have trouble choosing among them, but one of them that I thought was really hilarious was some of the listeners to this won't recognize my reference to the Monty Python comedy troupe, but it was a British group back in, I think, the 70s, maybe even, I was aware of them in the 70s and 80s. They did skits, and some of the skits were quite funny. And one of them that's sort of iconic, and I think it's out there on YouTube still, is called the Dead Parrot sketch. And it's about a man who takes a cage with a parrot lying prone on the bottom of the cage into a pet store and says, I bought this, 2 days ago, and look at it, it's dead. And the owner of the pet store looks at it and says, no, it's not dead, it's sleeping. And they kind of go from there into a really silly exchange as each one of them tries to describe why they are right, and it's not breathing. Yes, it is breathing. You just can't see it because of the feathers. And on they go like this. So it's a hilarious sketch. So I was thinking, what could I do with a condo board that might kind of capture something like that. And so I ended up having a very elderly, a 92-year-old board member who has been plunked onto the board to the very great distress of my protagonist because she's one of the acolytes of this evil president that he has to deal with. Anyway, she's on the board and she seems to slump forward and then she doesn't say anything. And this is very unusual because usually she has a lot to say about everything. So the other board members are looking at her somewhat apprehensively, and eventually the chairperson says, is she, could she be? And then they sort of get into a conversation about this, and eventually they want my protagonist to test her for signs of for vital signs, and he thinks to himself, I don't know how to test a 92-year-old for vital signs. I don't even know if they'd have any. And so there's, anyways, some back and forth, and eventually the manager tests her and doesn't really see any vital signs, and so they call the ambulance and shows up, and she's carted off, and the president is very insistent that she's not dead, and I don't want any rumors going out about this because the president doesn't want people flocking onto the condo board. She wants to hand pick whoever comes. So she's very definite about this. So it's quite a hilarious scene, I think.
That's excellent. Um, do you think can people survive in politics without a sense of humor, or is it your experience that there are people who have no sense of humor?
I would say both actually, because I've known a few, actually, not that many, but a few who seem to have no sense of humor at all. It almost was as if that empowered them in some way to persist and keep going in a mysterious way and, just carry on. Generally, most politicians that I've had to deal with, they're they're very personable people and they kind of like people and they and again there are some real exceptions to this, but generally speaking, they're just easy people to deal with because
Mhm.
they kind of like dealing with whoever they happen to have in front of them at the moment. But the one thing I would say, it's sort of a message in the book, which I think we often ignore, is that politics is really difficult. And essentially, going back to this condo board, if you get a bunch of people arriving at the table with very different views about those plant pots or whatever it is, they have to find a way to agree with each other. And in liberal democratic theory, there's a debate, there's rational thinking, and people eventually converge on the rational solution to whatever the problem is. But in real life, that doesn't really seem to work, and people are very reluctant to change their minds, and getting them all on the same page about anything is often extremely challenging and stressful. So, I mean, I think we should give politicians credit for kind of living in this environment and perhaps value those skills a bit more and perhaps have more realistic expectations about what may happen because frequently in that condo board or that parliament or whatever it is, things go off the rails and some foolish things happen, and that's just kind of the way it goes. And
How important do you hold humor in your own life? Like what kind of a role does it play for you? How important is it?
I think it probably plays a fair role because I think I've always been kind of the clown in many of the environments that I happen to be in, and I do it partly because I think of something and I say it and people laugh, and that's always fun, and it lightens the mood of whatever it is and makes me feel more comfortable. I suspect that it is partly a coping mechanism that I would have developed as a younger person when I was extremely shy. And, it was a way of kind of a socially easing thing to do to kind of make things more comfortable. So I'm guessing putting on my invisible hat as an armchair psychologist, guessing that that might have been a factor. But I enjoy witty conversations with other people who do the same thing and kind of come back at me with something. It's just fun, you know.
Mm. One of the most endearing parts about your book launch. Now, I didn't get to be there, but I did get to watch the video. So thank you for sharing that with me. But you shared about the fear that a writer has when they're preparing for an event, that they're going to show up and no one else is going to be there. So
Yes.
I love that you shared that, because that's very vulnerable and it's very true. And the response to that from a like a full room, you had a full house there. You were launching at a bookstore, so that was lovely to see. But the response to that was really warm, and might have been your first laugh of the night that you got. Like, you kind of led with that,
Mm,
so that kind of set the
mm.
stage for just a really nice time. Can you talk about what that launch was like for you? How it felt to be in front of a room of people who were there to read your debut novel? You're
Yeah,
releasing your first book into the world. So yeah, just
yeah.
just share a little bit about that experience.
I would say mainly, it could be that I was a little bit numb because it was completely new for me, and I had no idea what was going to happen, and I really didn't know how many people were going to show up. So, and I've heard stories, terrifying stories about people. In fact, I heard one. It was an interview with Margaret Atwood, who talked about being at a book signing and there was nobody there, and eventually somebody came strolling in, and she thought with great relief, over at least I'm going to get somebody, and the person strolled over and asked her where the bathroom was. So I mean, you hear these stories and you realize, I mean, there's a lot about writing, and I think a lot about publishing, that you have to view it as an adventure because it's totally unpredictable. Is my impression.
Mhm.
It's so I was aware of that, and I thought, well, if nobody comes, then I won't have to make a talk for one thing. But on the other hand, I'd been casting about for some kind of reasonably economical way of getting a video done, and the people who do it professionally, they want to really take you in hand and give you a marketing plan and do all sorts of stuff. And so I didn't really find somebody that I thought was suitable for this. And then I have a friend who's actually in my book club who is an 80-year-old retired physicist. And I had to be amused in a way because my reaction to this challenge as a social sciencey arts type person was, oh my God, what can we ever do? We'll have to get a technical person to do this. And his reaction was, oh, can't be that hard. I'm going to turn myself into a videographer right now. And so, so 2 weeks later, this guy's making videos and putting them up on YouTube. And his obsession is Shakespearean plays, so he's doing readings of sonnets or whatever. So I mean that's how the video happened, and so it would have been a disappointment to him if I'd canceled the book launch just because. So I didn't think of that at the time, but I probably would have thought of it if cancellation had been an issue.
Mhm.
So anyway, yeah, I really didn't know what was going to go happen, but that's fun. I mean, that's life is often rather predictable, and again, with this writing publishing thing, I don't think it is.
No, not at all. Just gotta hope for the best.
Hmm. Yeah.
Is there anything throughout the publishing journey so far that has surprised you?
Um, I'm a bit surprised in a way. I thought I was going to try to be a bit rigorous about how much time I would spend on marketing because you could spend endless time, and I suspect a lot of it would accomplish very little because again, reaching back into my sort of store of little anecdotal experiences. And I still remember going into chapters one day, and there was a very forlorn fellow sitting at a little table near the door with a pile of books on it, and there was nothing to indicate who he was or why he was there or what he was, the books, nothing, no posters or anything. And needless to say, people were not, clawing each out of the way to get to the table. There was nobody there. He was being
Mhm.
completely ignored, and he just looked so utterly forlorn. It was touching. So I mean, I've seen things like that, and I've seen how things can, go wrong. So I decided I was going to try to be a bit thoughtful and rigorous about how much time I'd spend on marketing. I have been a bit surprised at not receiving the same amount of enthusiasm from our local public library as I would have anticipated.
Mhm.
Because from their point of view, I would have thought, it's something local that they could kind of market a bit, or at least
Mhm.
promote a bit. But they have I do have my book. They did consent to put my book onto the list, so it's there, and there
They
are people.
consented.
There is a waiting list actually to get it,
Oh,
because
good.
there's only one copy, Alana. I have to say that.
Well, maybe this
Anyway,
will this will light a little fire, maybe, and they'll be like, "Oh, there's actually interest in this book. We need to get a couple more." That would be
yeah,
great.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of developing a fictitious character and contacting them and chewing them out about the fact that I was having to wait. I was number 14, and I'm not going to wait that long, and so forth. Anyway, so it's one copy of the book in the library, is what I'm saying. And similarly, with our local newspaper, I contacted the editor, and I have actually got somebody else now who is a reporter reviewer who said she was going to, follow up with the editor, but the editor didn't seem to be hugely interested. But I guess from their point of view, in a city the size of Ottawa, 1 million people in the urban area, they probably just get swamped with a lot of people wanting to, in some form or other, do promotions through on the editorial page. So I expect it's understandable. But from my point of view, especially the Ottawa Citizen, which markets itself now as, the local
Mhm.
variant of the post media chain, I would have thought anything local would be kind of top priority for them. So
Yeah.
those have been a couple of surprises. Another thing I had not expected was that on Facebook there'd be all sorts of clubs that apparently are dedicated to promoting your book, but really, as far as I can see, they consist of other writers promoting their book to other writers, and I wonder how much that all accomplishes really. But anyway, it was a bit of a surprise to me to see that. But I think the reality is that certainly none of us writers like me, have a clue about how to really go about this.
Yeah.
So, people do what they can.
Yeah, and I think it is about consistency and just continuing to show up and be loud and to talk about your work and remind people. People need to hear something over and over and over again before that seed finally really gets planted and they're willing to part with those hard-earned dollars.
Hmm.
So I
Hmm.
just keep going. Like, do you have any tips for other writers in the same boat who, like, how do you not get discouraged in the marketing
Uh,
aspects?
well, I was tempted to say, don't do anything because you'll be competing with me. But anyway, I won't say that. No, no. I guess my tip, I think your point about recognize that this is a process that's going to unfold over a considerable time, and don't try to do everything at once, and don't burn yourself out, but just be consistent and keep getting the message out there in one form or another. I think that's a good advice for sure. And I mean, for myself, I used to do long distance running, so I see it as a bit of a marathon in the
Yeah.
same way. You just And while you're doing it, focus on whatever it is, wherever you are, kind of, try not to think about how far you've got to go, things like that. So,
Yeah.
I think those were the suggestions I would make. And maybe the other one, I think before a person does this, they probably need to think carefully about what their expectations are and what is realistic. So
Mhm.
if you're a debut author, and I think at the launch I made the point that I'm a little uncomfortable with that term. Your visibility is you're subterranean. You ain't even at ground level in terms of any kind of visibility. So, that's it's not nobody is malicious about this, and everybody I've dealt with that has anything to do with literature, they're wonderful people, and they care about it. But that's just reality, and I think you have to be realistic. And so you don't promise your wife a world tour.
Did you? Did you do that?
No, I
Okay.
didn't do that.
Okay. That's good. Maybe the next one. Maybe the next one.
Maybe.
You were able to secure some really great endorsement statements from some pretty established people, one of whom was Terry Fallis, who is a very well renowned author, winner of the Leacock Medal for Humor. First of all, how did you do that? And secondly, what what does that do to you getting feedback from people like him? And you had some people who were quite established in the Canadian political system who provided endorsement statements that are all in the book. Unpack that a little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah, well, in terms of Terry Fallis, I started to check into the Substack universe and I found a number of them that are actually quite interesting. And it's another of those things that if you let yourself go too far, you could be spending all your time on Substack, reading stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to be quite discriminating. And with Fallis, given his first book, Best Laid Plans, was about a parliamentarian. He's in a way one of the kind of models that I have in mind. Not so much that I'm kind of trying to write the same kind of book, but he approved that Canadians could be interested in parliamentary politics if it's presented in the right way. And I think that's quite an interesting accomplishment that he managed to do there. So I started following his Substack, and here I guess I have to come to another tip for young would-be authors that I will disclose, and that is you pretty well have to be shameless. you,
Yeah.
you sort of find somebody's Substack, and then start to put a few interesting comments in. Now I have to say there are people. Another Substack that I follow a bit is Margaret Atwood's, and largely the comments that she gets are terribly sycophantic. They're things like, "Oh, Margaret, you're so wonderful, you're an icon," and so on. And if I were Margaret, and I guess it's a bit of a stretch for me to speculate about how I might feel, but I think I'd just be impatient with all this stuff. So, in other words, I think you have to be shameless and you have to say something that interests your target, but I wouldn't be sycophantic at all. So anyway, I began to have some exchanges with Fallis, and eventually, then I just emailed him, and asked him if he'd be willing to consider, and gave him a brief description of the book. And by then, I had some sense of him as a person. He's a very sociable and utterly generous with his time, and he does a lot. I mean, even the fact that this Substack of his, he does it every 2 weeks, and it's kind of a detailed look at all sorts of aspects of the life of an author. It's extremely informative, and he's quite frank about things like the economics of being an author in Canada. you know, he
Mhm.
he doesn't pull punches. So partly because of the feeling I got that he was he would be receptive. I did this, and yes, he would be receptive. And but he said he had a queue, so he'd try to get to it, and so he's obviously doing this for a number of people. And so then when he did say the nice things that he said, I appreciated that very much, for sure. And similarly with the politicos or the former parliamentary librarian that I got, it was important to me that people should be able to read this book have and see that actually it's saying something about politics.
Mm.
And a critic who I'm very well acquainted with, and I suppose I should just admit it's my wife here. Still, sometimes tells me I'm just way too oblique, and if I want to say something, I should say it. Anyway, I was a bit concerned that people would just take it as a funny story about a condo board, and they might not make the links. So it was gratifying that both these folks, I saw that. So yeah, I mean that was, you know, it was very good to have those people. But I think the lesson I would again another one a tip for the people that who might listen to this is, in general, people are can be very generous and helpful if they feel that if they sense that you're doing something that they are interested in and that you are committed to. I think people might be surprised at the experience they would have, even if people who are so-called big names. I mean, after all, behind that big name is just a person, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a good
Mm-hmm.
reminder.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you have mentioned that you're uncomfortable with the term debut novelist. Why?
Yeah, well, you had to go back to that, didn't you?
Yeah, because I think it's
Well,
charming.
well, at the book launch, I said it made me feel as if I should come floating into the room down a curving staircase wearing something frilly.
Yeah.
And um, that might have been a slight overstatement, but I mean, the term debut author, it does have a connotation of, it takes me back to debutantes and balls and, you know, that sort of that world. And I was thinking, surely there might be another term for that, or another another approach might be, you know, is it advantageous to tell people, "Hi, I've never written anything before, but here's my first one." I'm not sure if it's necessarily advantageous. I mean, credit to the debut person to have done it, but I think it might be if there was some other term like newly experienced or something that.
Well, and the truth is that behind any debut author, there's a whole history of writing that
Yeah,
happened before that. There are probably drawers of manuscripts that never made it to a publisher's desk, or writing that isn't in fiction, right? Because I believe that you have quite a career before fiction of
yeah.
nonfiction writing. Is that right?
Yeah, well, that partly it was my job because
Yes.
one of the key things in our job, we worked with the parliamentary committees. So when they did their studies, we would draft the study after having escorted them through the process of hearings and whatnot that would lead up to it.
Hmm.
And for me personally, it's again, it's one of those things that you probably learn retroactively to some extent, but I had been thinking, especially when I arrived in that work, I thought of myself as a sort of a policy wonk type person. But at a certain point, I realized what I really liked was the writing. I was especially happy when I was sitting down at a screen that was blank and I'd be thinking, okay, so what should this report look like? And, how am I going to get what are the key messages to get across and so forth. And how can I make it a little bit different? Because there are an awful lot of parliamentary reports kicking around. So it sort of kind of retrospectively, I think, reinforced for me how much I enjoy writing. And I've also then done a bit of policy writing since I retired and an academic article and so forth. So that I've certainly done a fair bit of that. And some people say that that kind of writing is death, and once you start writing like that, you'll never be intelligible again to anybody else.
Oh no.
But well, I have a slightly different experience with that. One of which was long ago when I was a graduate student, my supervisor said, "You grew up in Saskatchewan, but your style is Germanic," he said, and namely long sentences, subclauses, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think that any kind of writing where you have to think carefully about how you're expressing things is ultimately beneficial. And the nonfiction kind of writing that I was doing, it was extremely rigorous about logic and concepts. And I feel that was beneficial to me generally. It just makes you think about things that you otherwise, might not be as fully aware of. So I think any kind of writing is good for people, actually.
What was your writing process like for the Tyranny of Good Intentions? Like how long did it
um,
take you? What was your daily practice?
Okay, the daily process for me is I'm a relatively early riser, so I'm usually up, say, around 6 or whatever, and getting coffee. I now read a newspaper online rather than having it in my lap. But that's usually a part of it.
Mhm.
And then I'm at my desk by 8 or whatever, and so the morning is my kind of productive time. And frequently there's something in the newspaper that may cause some kind of weird idea to surface and give me some kind of a thought.
Mhm.
Um, so typically I'd work um, subject to any number of interruptions. I'd typically work in the morning, and then in the afternoon I prefer to be doing something unrelated, like going biking or doing something active ideally. But I might be thinking about what I wrote that day, and frequently I find it's quite surprising how often you might have a problem when you go to bed at night, but when you wake up in the morning, it's something you'll think of something, some solution for it that
Mhm.
is useful. So that's part of the process for me, I would say too. Assuming that my subconscious might bail me out occasionally if I have a problem.
Sure, sure. Are you working on a new writing project now?
Yes, right now because involved in the writers group here that focuses on short stories.
Mhm.
So I've gotten into short stories. I'm actually quite liking them. So I've got several of them on the go, and I have been, shipping them out occasionally to literary mags and so
Mhm.
forth.
Great.
Um, yeah, so that's going, and then I think I may have at the launch mentioned I have a complete previous novel that's sitting in my drawer and that has been very emphatically rejected by everybody that I know. So, and I've come to realize that it needs something, it needs some help, but it also doesn't, it's not letting me go. So I've been sort of mulling around, what could be done with that.
Mhm.
Occasionally I'll let myself just sort of vaguely think about other novels that could be written. And I have several of these in mind, but um, the ones I have in mind strike me as being awfully difficult to do. So
Okay.
I'll have to think carefully about that.
Yeah.
But it could be. I mean, as is so often the case, when you actually start doing something that's difficult, that's where you might surprise yourself, or it might surprise you in terms of what happens. So
Yeah.
so I I feel there's actually more than I have time to do because there's the whole writing thing, and then there's reading. I try to do a lot of reading. I'm involved in a book club, actually two book clubs at the moment, and I'm a slow reader. So I have always got, a stack of
Mhm.
books and notices from the library about overdues. So there's lots to do there too. And I actually did want to mention there are some other Canadian authors. I think we've got a lot of really good writing happening in Canada, to the point where at times I feel a certain amount of embarrassment about actually doing more writing when we do have a lot. But there are authors. There's one that I'll mention is Nathan Ruthnam, who wrote a couple of books a few years ago, and I don't know what he's doing now, but he, among other things, he wrote a very interesting piece about the experience of being a brown person in Canadian literature. He was born and grew up in Kelowna, so he finds that in the literary world, he's expected to be pining for getting back to his roots in India and getting in touch with his ancestors, and he feels he has no feeling like that at all. He says, "Look, I was born in Kelowna. That's
This
where my
is
roots
home.
are."
Yeah.
That's right. So I thought that was just a really neat perspective to take and courageous for him to say that, given the level of expectations that he seemed to be talking about as being different. So I mean, there are lots of really interesting people around for
Mhm.
sure to read.
I have one more question, and
Okay.
that's, can you break down where you got your title, The Tyranny of Good Intentions? What do you mean by
Um,
that? What can people
okay.
expect from your book based on that title?
Okay. Okay. Well, the title initially came to me when I was thinking narrowly about this condo board, and I was thinking it's really, that president has turned it into a tyranny. She just rules it with an iron hand. But then as I began to think more about the novel, I began to feel that that title is almost like a motif running through it, because the condo board is a tyranny in a sort of more conventional way. The all of the condo, most of the condo board members obey the president, and they all tell themselves that they're doing it because they're there for community service. They're not just there for themselves.
Mhm.
And when they tell themselves this, it seems to mean nobody should question what they're doing. And they get very indignant when people in the condo take offense at, the removal of potted plants or whatever it is. So there's a kind of a tyranny of self confidence happening at the board level. And then the two main characters, they go through this whole experience of their marriages apart and they're trying to put it together. And at some point, they both realize that their behavior was guided by what they saw as their high principles. For the protagonist, it's honesty, and for his wife, it's zero tolerance for some of traditional men's behavior. And they both saw themselves as taking stands on moral grounds. And then as they get further into their conversation, they both realize that these were rationalizations for other motives and reasons for doing things. So there's a kind of tyranny of the good intentions of each individual that's unfolding in the personal lives of these two people. So it's actually kind of a motif that appears in various ways in the novel.
That's a good
So,
answer.
okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you. Quite welcome.
Is there anything else
Um,
that you would like to share or touch on?
well, I guess the main thing I would share, if it doesn't embarrass you, is I've certainly enjoyed working with you, and your enthusiasm for literature and for the people that you work with just seems to be a bottomless resource,
Mhm.
and I'm sure we all appreciate that a lot. It's great.
Oh,
So just
thank you.
carry on.
Yeah, I'll keep going as long as people keep trusting me with with their work.
Good.
Yeah. And I mean, it's been a pleasure to work on your book. I
Well,
think the
thank you.
story is so compelling. It is very funny. I've only heard good things about it, so I
Mm-hmm.
do think people are enjoying it, and I'm happy to see it out in the world and reaching new
Mm-hmm.
readers. And like you said, it is a marathon. It's a long game, and a book like this, most books are evergreen. Like it's always going to be relevant.
Mm-hmm.
The themes that you're touching on are always
Yeah.
going to be things that are happening in people's lives. I think that everyone can find themselves somewhere in this
Mm-hmm.
story. There's going to be a character they relate to. There's probably going to be a character that they are infuriated by. There's going to be a character that they love. So there really is. It's a story for everyone, and it is timeless because
Mm-hmm.
human nature, right? You're really just exploring human nature, as any
Yeah.
good literature does.
Yeah, I think I would like to think so. And I mean, I think there are issues, one of which is the trade-off and how do you find the balance between, your personal life and doing some kind of community service.
Yeah,
And that's one thing that the protagonist struggles with, and I think we all do to some extent. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway, thank you for those comments. But I would say to any of those people who might find themselves in my novel, no, it's not you.
Promise. Where can people find you or connect? How do people connect with you if they want to reach out, if they want
Oh,
to invite you to their book club? Like, are you open to
yeah.
things like that?
Sure, I'd be flattered and delighted. The simplest way is just going to my website, which is www.jackstilborn, one word and one L in stillborn.com. And I've got contact information there as well as other news and so forth. So that's probably the simplest thing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time and given a lot of information. I've learned a lot about politics actually, which is wonderful. I am relieved to know that there are many people with a sense of humor in politics because from the outside it seems so dry and depressing often. So I am very
Oh,
relieved to know that your experience held a lot of kind of levity and laughter, and I certainly don't know how to get through life without a sense of humor. So I'm glad that that's breaching out into kind of those more serious spaces, so that that's refreshing to hear, so thank you.
oh, very good, very good. Well, thank you for doing this and taking your time, which is you're a very busy person. So
Yeah, of course, my
appreciate that.
pleasure.
Take care.
Yes, yes. We'll talk soon.
Okay, good,
Okay,
good.
okay. Bye
Okay,
bye.
bye bye.
So, as you heard there, Jack came to us from Ottawa, where he has lived for quite some time. I wonder if maybe I should share his bio just to give you a little more context. I'm sure you picked up so much from that conversation, but Jack Stilborn showed early promise with a comic story that made a cousin laugh so hard she threw up. He was then deflected by life. Careers included part time academic, political science, intergovernmental affairs advisor for the Ontario government, and research analyst for Parliament. Outside work, he has raised three children with spouse Linda and enjoys eclectic reading, volunteer work, cycling, kayaking, no whitewater, please, and cross country skiing. Following a period of writing about parliamentary government, he returned to fiction with a short story that received honorable mention in the 2024 Alice Munro Short Story Contest. His short stories also appear in literary magazines such as Blank Spaces. So, as he said, you can check him out at jackstillborn.com and you can grab your own copy of this very good book from Chicken House Press. You'll find it on the Chicken House Press website. You can walk into any Chapters Indigo across Canada, ask them to order it. Walk into Barnes and Nobles, they can order it in for you. Ask them to put it on the shelf, and ask your libraries to bring it in. That's one of the hardest things I've found to break into. I don't know what the secret code is, but one of the most effective things is for readers, local readers, to go into their local library and request titles. So if you walk in and say, "Hey, I heard about this amazing book, I want it on the shelf," they're likely going to order it as long as they have a budget to do so. Your purchase, your request at a library, that all goes to support Jack and his new writing career in his retirement. So that would be amazing. And just because it came up in our conversation, I do want to read you the quote, the endorsement quote that came from Terry. It is on the front cover. There's a little excerpt of it, but here is the whole thing. Jack Stilborn has written a very funny and thoughtful novel about people, politics, and the never ending quest to do the right thing. The narrator, Andrew Walmer, lurches from one crisis to the next, doing his level best to keep his world from spinning right off his axis. I happily joined him for the joyride. Terry is a very established Canadian author, and we are so honored that he agreed to read and endorse this book, to have his name right here on the cover. So cool. So, if you want to know about democracy's smallest battleground and all the shenanigans that a condo board might get up to, please check out this book. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening, watching, however you're consuming this content. Go support Jack however you can. And